Daniel T. Dorrance, you're the production designer for The United States versus Billie Holiday, about the singer's persecution by the federal government due to her singing Strange Fruit. Well, first off, how in depth was the research process just in capturing the visual style and the design of that period with so many locations?
Well, we started off, as always, doing the full research hit from every level, from club interiors to all the things labeled in the script, maybe restaurants and just a general feel and tone of that era. And I had a little head start on this one because we were up and running, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago. So I did a whole block of research during that period. So I really got my head around it. And then they, for some reason, pulled the plug at that point. And then when it started up again, it was like, oh, I was already ready to hit the ground running, and had already spoke to Lee about, a lot of it. So from that point of view, it was fantastic because we had a short time frame. But the research process is always the first thing is getting your head around what movie we're making and what's the look of it, and what are the marks we want to hit. And with Elise, the decorator, both of us do do our sort of, each side does their own research. She's hitting more of the decoration part and the interiors and things, and I'm just kind of get an overall tone and feel. And from that process, I found a great image of New York in the late 30s, 40s, I think, that was colorized by somebody out there in the internet land, which just had the right feel and tone to it. So I did a little Photoshop. I put Andrew in the shot, gave her a fur coat and an umbrella, and sent it to Lee. And he was like, "Oh my God, yeah, that's it. That's the feel of the movie, So from that, he loved that so much, we ended up finding a place for it in the movie, where Andrew, as we see now, is walking across like a Times Square type space, raining and all the reflections of the lights in the background. And so that was kind of a win for me in the very beginning to kind of understand where, what kind of movie we're making and what's the tone and what's the palette. It's always kind of the first steps. So yeah, research is huge.
And the film covers several years from the 1940s to the 1950s. Is there a lot of change in style or design that you had to be attentive to, or was it easy to kind of to design things in a certain way for the whole film or from scene to scene?
Not 10-year span, no, but what really kind of is picture vehicles and things like that really tell the tale of those little moments, those little subtleties, because when you're trying to find a car that in theory is a 1949, it shouldn't look like it was 60 years old already, so, or beyond. So trying to find those picture vehicles that had the quality of that were essentially new in those years, those are sort of the harder things to sort of come to work through. And in props as well, like the record player and things like that, where we had to I think Simone, the prop master, had to refurbish and bring everything up to, today's standards of that period. But ultimately, once you nail the sort of the genre or the time frame, you kind of are in the groove then. So, okay, that's what was happening then. A lot of wallpaper, and you're kind of running at that point, and everything sort of takes its tone from that. So, yeah.
How many would you say you used a lot of newly built sets versus locations that you adapted for the film?
I mean, ultimately, we built one big set on stage, which was Cafe Society, and with that came the dressing room and a couple little sort of linking sections of set pieces. But for the most part, I'd say, I don't know, 98% was on location. Now we'll go to a location, we'll do a fair amount of work. We'll put in some walls and, condense things or, paint or, all these different things. And based on that, the venues for all these clubs that we had to pull off, which is about 7, I think, they're all being used. They're at the time we shot this movie in 2019, they were working venues. So we had very little time in between, each calendar event. So we found a 5-day window. Okay, let's go with that one. And that was the first thing we really needed to nail down in the movie in terms of locations, which is all these different venues, because we had to put our mark on the calendar. So those were tricky for that reason, because we all had to do our jobs within that 5-day period, meaning, construction, set decorating, paint, and then lighting. Ultimately, that is the last step before we shoot. So, yeah.
And was there a lot of visual effects work that was used to help like extend locations or help build out and create locations in addition to what was physical in the environment?
We did, any big exterior had a little extension to it to help sell the period or get rid of anything modern. That's always the sort of the tough chore when you're doing a period picture, is the first thing you got to do is get rid of everything modern. So, and that costs money in the end, because either one, they won't allow us to remove it, so we got to cover it. And then you have all those steps that have to take place, and then you have to make sense of it. Like, we just can't just cover it with something that made no sense. So you're kind of often found with those steps first before you even start the proper process of making it a period correct location, exterior, for the most part. And it goes with interiors as well. You have plugs and things like that, or cameras that you have to hide. So based on that, like the courthouse, for instance, we had, they have all these cameras and things in their modern day courthouses that they wouldn't let us remove. So CGI has to go in and clean that up in the end, get rid of little things like that. But we had some pretty major, all the street scenes had some extension in the background, because we can only control usually about a block. And then after that, we can't control people or cars passing by, or, what's on a sign on a building and things like that. So those things all happen in post. They kind of, you're able to clean it up what you're left with in terms of the cut.
And such a big part of the film is Billie Holiday performing on stages, and the film includes so many different venues that she performs in, from these smaller clubs to Carnegie Hall. Like, what was the process of creating those looks, like working with like the cinematography and the costumes to create a look that you wanted for the film and for the mood?
I'll start off with costume. We had a lot of design meetings with Lee, which included the costume, and Andrew Dunn, the DOP, and we would go through and talk about the palette of each, the darkness of the walls, how we play the curtains. And that all starts with what was Billie wearing, So Paolo would say, okay, Billie's wearing a yellow dress in this scene, and we would sort of work backwards from that. So I didn't want to clash with that. I always wanted to be in sync. So we'd start with that and then work backwards. And then we come up with the sort of the stage look, if it were a stage, or if it's even a set, it might be wallpaper, it might be just a wall color. The set dressing itself, the tone of the scene. So we were all in sync with that on every one. So, for instance, we go into the Carnegie Hall location, which was a movie theater ultimately. It's close, but we had to do a little CG work on the audience depth. It wasn't a huge building, so we had to create the depth of Carnegie Hall beyond the sort of first 50 rows of seating to help with that. So that, you have to decide what your angles are and how often you're going to see that. And we put a row of green screen in the back to extend the audience and things like that. Because, Carnegie Hall is very specific in its architecture and so on. So, all those decisions go into each one, and we decide, what the look of each club had, based on research. And we would sort of work backwards from that. And a lot of clubs, we couldn't find any pictures of what those were. There were so few. Even Cafe Society wasn't well documented in terms of every wall and aspect of it. So there was some creative license we took here and there, and we built Cafe Society. So we had to plan that one carefully on the size and geography of the scene, and where Lee wanted people to come from, etc. So. Ultimately, and that's a collaborative effort that we all sort of get around a table and discuss and develop a plan.
And was it more challenging, would you say, to create like her private spaces, which have all so much detail and have to feel so lived in and reflect her in such a major way? Like what kind of work and decision making and detail went into that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of all the stage, the backstage stuff, those were probably one of the funner aspects we had of the design processes. We had like 7 to do, so you want to make each one iconic in its own way. Be it with color and in terms of decorating, and Elise brought this, like I said, wallpaper before. She found this great place in New York that had all this vintage wallpaper that was of the period. So we'd actually order rolls of it and find out it got there and it was all super fragile. We had to end up scanning it and make our own version of it and putting it on the wall. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What were you asking me again?
Just talking about like creating her private spaces.
Right. So we were, so in each one of them, we sat down and decided, okay, she's wearing this dress, or, she's going to go and she's wearing this after the show. And then based on that, we come up with the geography the best we can from Lee on how he wants the scene to play out. So a lot of those, we didn't really know where he was going to plot the characters until the day, which, he kind of likes to do it that way. He likes to come into the space, see what he has, and then he would send everyone away, and he and the cast would sort of, work through the blocking of the scene and decide, okay, you're going to walk from there and you're going to talk to her over there. And then at that point we know, okay, that's what we're seeing ultimately. So we have to basically offer up 360 if we can, just to be covered on any of those moments. So the dressing rooms were high on our list, and we really wanted to make them special. And Lee wanted a lot of flowers, and I think Elise, the decorator, found a lot of references to specifics in the dressing room, such as she had a pineapple on her table, and it's like, pineapple. Well, not sure why. We had to take into specific photos of her and her dog that she would have sort of placed in her mirror that we found in the research and things like that. So a lot of care went into all those layers, and that's kind of the fun of it. Ultimately, that's where you really enjoy the research and the learning that that goes on in any given film, which is I enjoy this. Wow, all that was going on, and that's what she was about, and those were the sort of people in her lives, and really trying to help sell that ultimately. And all of them wanted to have this sort of faded opulence. Like she was in these grand spaces, but they were all sort of on their way. There wasn't their heyday, typically, they were all well used. And we really wanted to show that, that there was a lot of layers to that, the history of each of them.
And what seems like maybe one of the most technically challenging scenes, or at least one of the most involved, is the one where Billie comes across the scene of the lynching, and that's like a continuous shot that follows her into the house and leads to her performance of Strange Fruit. Was that one of the more complex work that you did on the film in terms of creating those kind of winding spaces and really setting that up?
I say that it's odd how that one came about. Is when in the script, it's basically described as Billie gets off the bus and comes across a tree where someone has been hung. That's what we started with, and then the location process begins, and you start looking for the tree near a road and all these sort of things. We end up finding the first one I had found was a tree with a burnt down cabin next to it, which was like, oh wow, that's kind of we'll just use that, and then we found another one with actually a cabin that was upright. So we ended up combining all those three. I went and bought all the burnt cabin stuff and brought it to the other location, which is where you see behind the cross, as if they burnt the house down. And then the cabin itself, once that played out, Lee started thinking, it's like, well, why don't we do this? I'll have her see the hanging, the family with the hanging body and everything. They're trying to get her down, and then she can't deal with it, and she'll run into this cabin, and we'll start the process that it's now made the movie. So in terms of the technical aspects of that, it was a Steadicam shot. So we had to make way for the operator to walk ahead of Billie. So once she enters that space, it wants to be, this maze, and you're not even sure where you're going. So, and it wasn't terribly big. So it was, I don't know, a 40 by 40 room that had no walls or anything. So we had to decide, okay, what's the path? And then Lee would sort of come to us, say, okay, I first want him to see her. Then she meets the other girls, and then she's going to do drugs. And then the last hallway will be where she starts to blend, starts to change. We see the people changing, and then she goes on the stage. So that just required all of us to collaborate on what's the best method for that to happen. And then when the Steadicam would enter, we'd have walls pull out of the way. He'd go through, Billie would go through, then we put the wall back in because we wanted the space to feel bigger than it was. So she'd enter a hallway through what looked like another hallway, and then as you would look back, that hallway is longer now, because we extended it with our extra walls. And as she made her way through this whole maze, we had to have room for people to come out of nowhere. So we had to have access space for them. So yeah, it was a pretty tricky, and that all happened in one shot. It wasn't like he cut it. So it was a oneer basically. So from the moment we see her see that and react, it's all one shot, continuous. So everyone had their little jobs to do on the day in that 7 minutes of time. Walls were pulled in, put back in, drapes were dropped, characters would come out of that space. So it was pretty elaborate, and I will say that was a really emotional day to shoot that, because as we're watching it on a monitor in a side room, you can hear the action outside. You can hear the girls crying, and you hear Billie reacting. It gives me chills thinking about it now. It was it was a tough day, but I think it was a pretty effective shot in the end.
And there is so much tragedy to Billie Holiday's story, and struggle, but also, she was this incredibly like larger than life personality and a successful musician, despite what the government was trying to do to her. Like, was there a lot of balance in terms of visual, like capturing the struggle of her life with, kind of a sense of glamour and grandeur to who this woman was?
Yes, I think, we try to keep everybody in a sort of upscale space. It wasn't Dungeness, and, she still was amongst the nicer things in life. She just was struggling through it. So whether we treated we treated all the walls a lot darker than I probably normally would in another movie. And that's, through many discussions, as I told you, with the DOP and Lee. So we really wanted the costume and the characters to sort of float from the walls and sort of be in the center of our attention. And as we watch that scene as an audience member, the walls slowly start to creep back in because as you take focus and everything else. So that was kind of our plan, to sort of link that with that sort of background to her, and give it that ominous feel amongst this, as I said, faded opulence.
Well,
Yeah.
I want to congratulate you on your work on the film, and which, as we're recording this, has been streaming on Hulu for just a few days, and has already won Andrew Day a Golden Globe. So
Yeah.
congratulations on all that recognition for the film, and thank you so much for talking to me today.
No, thank you. It's great to sort of relive. It was over a year ago now, so it's exciting to see it all sort of come to fruition, and people are accepting it, in a great way.